1920s? Well, there was two parts. One could be described as abundance, the other as poverty.
Well, let's start with the beginning.
The word extravagance can be used to describe the first part of the 1920s. The stock market became more and more popular. It was a quick and easy way to make some bucks. People were used to investing. After all, they bought Liberty bonds during the war. Whether it was to increase their yields in the stock market or to buy a new appliance, people borrowed. A lot.
This borrowing is reflected through the increase in investment banks, which grew from 277 in 1912 to 1,902 banks in 1929. That is a 686% increase in the number of banks. Banks began to merge, and the Bank of America and Chase Manhattan took the lead. Then came conspicuous consumption. What good was the money that you had if you couldn't show other people that you actually had it? With the exception of farmers, it was a very good time. Goods like fridges, washing machines, vacuums, radios, hot, running water, electricity, and automobiles became available and more affordable through mass production techniques, such as the assembly line, horizontal integration, and vertical integration. To understand the full magnitude of how much people bought, let's look at radios. The revenue from radios jumped from $60 million in 1922 to $842 million in 1929. The middle class emphasized cleanliness, and families were smaller than in the past. The consumption was also furthered with the emergence of a new industry, advertising. The pop culture around advertising began to take form. Malls began to develop and society as a whole was being affected. For example, the automobile would change how courting was done. The United States owned 80% of all cars worldwide at the time, and Hollywood produced 90% of all films worldwide. Flappers and the Jazz Age would start to emerge during this time period. America's soft power with media was growing, but not everyone was happy with this change.
Jim Worsham, America is indebted to you for your service to your country. If I may, what changed in your life from before and after the war?
Well, after the war, there was clearly wealth inequality. Before I went to the war, everyone worked for their money. It was good. Then after, people were acting stupid, just borrowing to buy. Crime developed. Al Capone practically controlled Chicago. People were drinking when it was illegal to drink. And I was so confused as where the generation of people working hard went. It was as if everyone became a different person. Heck, we were the lost generation. When times became hard, that's when I lost it. I wasn't happy with our government, for not doing anything, which led me and my comrades to go on the march in Washington, fight for our bonuses, fight for what's right.
The march the veterans spoke of was the Bonus Army, organized by James Cox. They marched to Washington and demanded that they be paid their World War I bonuses, slated to be paid out 13 years later. Immediately, President Hoover ended up calling the Army to rid the area of those veterans. Similar to the veterans, women were also distressed. The war saw the start of women's employment, but they quickly lost their jobs to the men returning from combat when the war ended. Also, farmers started to go bankrupt. The war in Europe had led American farmers to produce crops efficiently and abundantly, but the end of World War I meant that the European farmers could now grow their own produce. Thus, American farmers had a surplus of produce, but with less people buying them, it drove the price down tremendously, meaning less money for the farmers. Therefore, there were two societies beginning to emerge, one with and one without money. The one with money lived happily as ever. With money, they began a culture that would rebel against the previous one.
So what do you think about the term flapper, and how does it apply to you?
First of all, I don't like that term, and frankly, I find it offensive that you asked.
Oh, well, my apologies. What was life back in the early 20s for you?
Life was great. Everything was in the palm of my hand. I had money, I I had style, I had a car. Life was moving fast and I was moving with it. We were rebelling against our parents, and it was always a fun time. We drank in secret and smoked and did whatever we wanted, and didn't really have a care in the world. People did some bad stuff that they shouldn't have done. It was called the age of excess. I felt like I could do anything. It was prosperous, I guess. I mean, I had a lot of money and bought a lot of things and did a lot of things without really ever thinking about money. Just buy, borrow, and buy. That was it. Just buy, borrow, and buy.
This buy, borrow, and buy did not last. The second part of the 1920s was drastically different from the first half, which climaxed on October 29th, 1929.
It was just horrible. Truly horrible.
It was the worst thing that ever could have happened, and there was nothing we could do about it.
We thought the government would help.
But it was all in vain.
President Hoover believed in laissez-faire economics. Thus, he did nothing to help the suffering Americans. Instead, he instituted the Hawley-Smoot tariff, which began a 40 to 50% import duty. This worsened the Depression because Americans were faced with higher prices on goods. Hoover even vetoed the McNary-Hawson bill, which would have helped out farmers with crop prices. The situation worsened when labor unions lost most of their momentum due to the Red Scare. The U.S. government started to raid radicals after the war, which included labor unions for their seemingly similar views to communism. Many rural and small-town Americans even believed unions to be quote-unquote foreign influence. In the end, because of these opposition and raids, America's labor unions were decimated. Thus, the combined effects of buying on margin, laissez-faire economics, the decimation of labor unions, lack of trade, and the debts farmers had all culminated into the economy starting to crumble on October 24, 1929. And on October 29th, 5 days later, the economy lost $40 billion. The crash of the stock market affected everyone around the country, and panic ensued. Because buying on margin had become so popular, the crash was even more detrimental. The problem arose when people would lose money and then continue to buy on margin in an effort to make back the original money. This is what destroyed the cycle from its core. Another problem had to do with practices companies used. In the 1920s, companies were not required to report the correct stock price, so they could adjust their price to make it more appealing or for any purpose. This became evident when General Motors stock dropped from $73 to $8. By then, the banks were already losing money, and this is where we saw lines of people forming outside of the banks trying to withdraw the money that they had. The crash can never be truly understood without understanding the statistics concerning unemployment and other measurements explaining poverty. The gross national product fell from $104 billion in 1929 to just $56 billion in 1932. 20% of all banks closed and 30% of money supply evaporated. The unemployment rate was at 25%, and this figure doesn't include any sharecroppers or farmers out of work. The show business paper, Variety, summed up on October 29th with the headline, "Wall Street lays an egg." Changes needed to take place and quickly, which is exactly what President FDR offered. In his fireside chats, he exemplified that he was not going to sit around doing nothing, but will do anything, something, to help out suffering Americans. Thus, Roosevelt was the winner of the 1932 election.
So what do you think about the new president? Do you think he's going to make things better?
Well, he can't really make things much worse, can he? But, yeah, FDR, he seems like a good guy. Seems like he's going to turn things around. Social Security policies seem a lot better. I think America is going in for a good ride.
FDR did anything he could to try to save America. He engaged in Keynesian economics and in what is termed the first 100 days. He and Congress passed programs known as the alphabet soup. It may be because of FDR's efforts that America was able to last through such economic hardships. He would leave lasting legacies that would hopefully still affect America for hundreds of years. He introduced Social Security, which provides funds for the elderly, and the Glass-Steagall Act, which would create the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, ensuring people's savings for years to come.
Is there anything we can learn from this? Anything, really.
Well, what can't you get from this? No one is invincible. No one is immune. The signs of the Depression were there, but Hoover did nothing. When a problem arises, something has to be done. Whenever a problem arises, it can't be allowed to snowball into something bigger. So, what did I learn? I learned to do something, not nothing.